Now that we have our rules, let's go ahead and have them fire by simulating changes to the weight attribute and the location attribute of our asset. So we're going to first simulate the dropping of the weight below our 15,000 pound threshold. And we're going to see that an email gets generated. And we're going to then move the asset virtually into our geofence, and we're going to see that an email gets generated. So I'm monitoring my email account. I should see emails show up in this other section. And let's go ahead and look at, I don't need this tab, so let's go ahead and look at the home page. And there we see, there's our asset, there's our area. If I click on the asset, it seems that its location is right there. If I go to the asset details, I see that its weight is currently 49. Now you'll recall that the rule for which I want the email action to be sent is on the weight dropping below threshold. So I'm going to simulate first sending the weight above that threshold. So let me go ahead and do that. This is using some code that's behind the scenes. I'm going to make the weight 17,000 pounds. And you shouldn't really see that happening. And if I was to refresh this, you will see that the weight has indeed gone up to 17,000 pounds. And let me make sure that's empty. Okay, now I'm going to drop the weight below the 15,000 pounds. And I want you to also be aware of this events menu item that we haven't looked at. And these are all the events that get generated that have actions associated with them, or they may not. So let's go back and look at our home page and look at our one asset and its details. And now I'm going to drop its weight below the 15,000 or simulate that happening. I'll send it back to 49. Okay. Now if I go back, you see that the weight has gone down to 49. If I go to events, you'll see that an event has occurred, and you see this circle next to the event that basically says it's an open event. Now, if I didn't have that rule that fired be closed by a closing rule, then what that means is that some human being would have to manually acknowledge this event for it to eventually go away. And maybe that's what you want. In that case, you don't need a closing rule. Then a human being would have to manually acknowledge that this event has occurred and then manually change the state from open to a closed state. And it can be done that way. But since I have a closing rule, all I need to do is have the weight go back above the threshold, and this automatically gets closed. But before that, since the weight did drop and I did get an event, does that mean I got an email? Let's take a look. Apparently I did get an email. Apparently I have something else, but that's okay. Here it is. That's the email I was looking for. Tank car weight dropped below threshold. There's my body. Tank car is light. Event status, tank car not full. And there's my asset ID, everything I wanted. Great. Now let's go ahead and send the weight back up. So here I go. Send the weight back up above the threshold. That happens to be 15,000 in both cases, but could have been different. So update, save and test. You're not seeing what I'm doing behind the scenes. I'm just simulating the weight going back up. So if I was to go back and look at my asset details, the weight is back up to 17,000. Now if I go look at my events, you see that the event has closed, or it's in a closed state, thanks to my closing rule. Okay, So now I'm going to do the same with the area and the location attributes. So I'm going to go back to home, and there's the location of our asset. I'm going to virtually move it into the geofence. Here I go. Behind the scenes, I'm going to run some code that simulates its movement. And if I was to refresh that, now you see that the asset has moved inside the geofence. And if I go to events, I see that a new open event has gotten created. Tank car approaching Austin HQ. Maybe the name of that subject was not exactly right, but that's okay. That's what I had asked for. And does that mean I got an email corresponding to that? Let's take a look. Sure enough, there it is. Tank car approaching Austin was the subject. Getting close to Austin, that was in the body of the email. There's the event status, tank car inside geofence, and there's my asset ID. Exactly as I wanted. The event is in an open state. How do I close it? Well, I did have a closing rule that if the tank car again left the geofence, the original rule gets closed, which means that this event gets set to its closing state or closed state as well. So let me do that. Let me manually or virtually move the tank car outside the geofence. Yeah. Doing that right now. Now, if I go back, it has moved. If I go back to my events, that event is now in a closed state. So my closing rule did do the work that I wanted. So hopefully this shows you that you can set up a very useful asset monitoring system with a lot of functionality without writing any code. I did use some code behind the scenes to simulate movements of assets and changing of attributes, but that was simulations. In your real system, all that information would flow into your system with the use of some kind of tracker. So none of that will probably be necessary. And right out of the box, you could actually have a lot of functionality available to you with no coding.